What I want to do for this period is, this is for those of you at a distance in time and space, this will not mean anything to you unless you want to view it just to see the process that we're doing on campus. But for those of us on campus, what I'd like to do is go through this listing of possible projects that I've put up there. I was hoping to flesh out these a little more, and there's actually several that were just there as just the barest of skeletons. But that has not quite happened yet. And then I'll see if you have questions about any of these. And as you ask, I can probably provide a little more detail, and I'll just add this in this document. Asking questions about a project doesn't indicate that you necessarily want to do the project. Okay? We're not holding anybody to any specific project just yet. But if you do have questions because you read it, thought it might be interesting, but I need to know more information, whatever, let me know. Before we do that, let me just again review those 4 different project types that you see here. I wonder how far I can push the zoom before we start losing stuff totally here. I don't know if I can do 150 or not. Oh yeah, I think so. Does that work okay? Yeah. As we mentioned the first day, and there are more than these genres or types, but you can put many IT projects into one of 4 major categories. One of those is development. A specific example of that would be to create an app, to use a programming language like Java or C# and actually create a software system. Now, I'm not expecting one or the other, and I don't want it to indicate that just because that's listed first that that's the best or most important kind. It's not. As a matter of fact, we don't do a lot of development from scratch in the world of information technology. It's important for an IT professional to know and understand coding, but full-scale development on an ongoing basis is handled by computer scientists more than IT professionals. Now, some of you are interested in this, and there's that possibility exists in even some of these projects or others too. So that's one type. I'm going to create something from scratch using a programming language. Another type is to take some pre-existing tools and then apply or manage them. Another term for that might be modify. You know, for example, that a spreadsheet in and of itself doesn't do anything. A spreadsheet's a framework. It's a template. I get rows and columns. I get functions. It's up to me as the IT professional to create the formulas, the algorithms, to determine what this spreadsheet is going to do. The same would apply to a database system. If you get MySQL or Oracle and put it on your machine, that's nice. It doesn't do anything. It's only going to do something when you as the IT professional create the schema, create the queries, normalize your database, create views and forms to input and output and all that kind of good stuff, right? Now, if you think about it, development and apply slash, oh, I'm sorry, did I say, I probably said apply manage. It's apply integrate, this so-called modify. That's pretty close, right? I mean, in a database and in a spreadsheet, we need to create algorithms. In a database, we need to create queries, perhaps in a language like SQL. In a spreadsheet, we need to create formulas in whatever we call the language of our spreadsheet, Excel or what have you. That's really similar to just using a language like Java or C# and doing it from, quote, scratch, end quote. All right. For whatever reason, sometimes people think that if you create something using a database or a spreadsheet, that's not as good or important as creating from scratch with a programming language. But not the case. These are just different ways of solving a problem in IT. The third type of project, the manage project, and by the way, it would be a shame to go through an IT program and not have experience with an actual management project, because much of what we do in IT is management related. If you say the word management to just the general population, they'll envision business management, that is, a supervisor or a boss and the relationship from that person to other people. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about managing the technology. In every organization, some technology already exists. The problem with many organizations is that technology doesn't exactly do what we need it to do. It needs to be managed. That might mean updated, that might mean reconfigured, that might mean changed somehow, and so it goes. It is very common for an organization to, well, I'll pick a specific example. We need a network operating system. So we install Windows Server version, whatever it might be. Somebody does the installation, and most things work, but not everything. Some things are documented, but not everything. But in the beginning, it's much better than the previous system, so nobody complains. But 6 months in, a year in or something, people start noticing, you know what? This isn't doing it could do so much more. It could work better. I know that Windows Server can solve these particular problems. But for whatever reason, the original person who set it up doesn't have time. Maybe they've moved on. The next person who comes along reads the documentation, doesn't know how to do things, etc. Okay? So managing things, for example, you come into an organization, they're using Windows Server 2003. They want to upgrade to Windows Server 2010. Well, it's not just, put in the DVD and click go. There's a lot more to it than that. You come into an organization, they've got a big network infrastructure, and they want to add things. We want to add 20 new computers. It's not just a matter of going buying another switch and running a wire. There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen there. Okay? So those management types of tasks. And then the final one, which is also large in the world of information technology, are the informational procedural tasks. These are tasks that typically are necessary to investigate an issue or a problem. For example, they say, hey, our network is slow. Now you know the problem. I mean, here, determining the problem isn't hard. The user knows the problem, they told you. Now you got to figure out why that is. You have to figure out the information that is necessary. There are more than these types of projects, but many projects fall in one of those 4 domains. And the thing for you to recognize as a student in 565 is the process documentation that you produce will be different depending upon the type of project. Folks doing an informational one, likely your problem definition doc is going to be really short. The user is probably going to know what the problem is. Now you should still investigate it, still make sure it's understandable, everybody there, versus a development project where the user is going to have this nebulous idea of, oh, I got this idea for this really cool app. Okay, why do you need it? What's it do? Well, take more work. So what I'm saying is what you're going to see and what you're going to see online at Angel is a template for the requirements document. Your specific project, you might have to tweak that a little bit. You might have to say, in my case, this section really doesn't apply. Okay. Let's take a look at some of these. I guess I can read enough of it so you know what it is. And then if you have questions, feel free to ask. And what I'd like to do is we can discuss it, and then I can update this document right here in real time. Set up the S118E computer lab. down this interior hallway, the far west side of our area here, there's a lab. It's S118E. Currently, there are 12 client machines there, along with a server dedicated for that lab. The client machines are supposed to dual boot between Linux and Windows. The server there is a Linux server, and it should serve those machines when they are booting into the Linux environment. The purpose of that lab is to help students investigate several specific issues, mainly issues in networking and data communications, and issues in system administration. That's what we investigate in that lab there. Well, that lab needs to be updated, reconfigured, documented. This is so typical of a real project that you might encounter as a working professional. Remember, when you're hired by an organization, the odds of you being the very first IT person and being able to spec the very first IT system in that organization are probably 0. Do you think the company you join already has technology? Probably. You think they already have a bunch of stuff in place? Very likely. And you know what one of your first jobs is going to be? Getting the stuff that they have to actually work. Yeah. Okay? Why? Because everybody else there is off doing other things, and they all recognize this is a problem, but they don't have time to do their job and get this network set up properly also. I've listed some of the things that need to be done there. Each client needs to be updated. Okay? I think Professor Wall would like a different distro of Linux. I forget what's on there now, or maybe just update the one that's there. Everything needs to be documented, and a performance baseline needs to be established. By a performance baseline, I mean this. For example, we would conduct a speed test between the clients and the servers there to see how quickly we can transfer data, how quickly we can query the server, etc. That performance baseline would then tell us, okay, this is how we think things are working right now when things are good. What happens in the future if people say, oh, this network is really slow? Well, now we have an objective measure. Rather than just somebody saying, well, it seems slower to me, we can go back and say, look, when we originally configured this, we could transfer a 20 megabyte file from the server to the client in 1.9 seconds. If today it takes 2.0 seconds, I don't think there's a problem. If it takes 2 hours, I think there's a problem. Right? We have a baseline for performance there. Documentation, etc., etc. Okay? This lab is going to be set up as both part of the larger CS network, but at times it needs to be its own separate network. That concept in IT is called a sandbox. When children are small, they oftentimes play in a sandbox. The sandbox is a controlled environment. They can do whatever they want, short of shoving sand down their playmate's, face or nose or eyes. You can do whatever you want there, and then after they're done, you take them out of the sandbox, you clean them up, you take them back home, and whatever happened in the sandbox doesn't matter. In IT, when we use the term sandbox, we mean, let's say we were doing something with datacom or system administration, and we blew the server away. It just blew up. Not physically, of course, but we wiped out something. No big deal. No big deal. If it happens, it happens. On the other hand, if we blow away a production server like the CS server called Chemnitz or the CUW server that does email, that'd be problematic. If the CUW server that handles student email suddenly blew up because a student did something bad to it, that would not be acceptable. So we need a way to have this be both its own little network, separate from everything else, and then also to connect to the network. Now, I've already suggested a solution, but I want to warn you there's more than one way to do this. We just have a firewall between that and the rest of the world. Anybody have questions about this first project? Questions come up even later. Be sure to ask. Possible project 2, set up CS network standard apps. In S114D there, and especially for undergraduate students, we use a number of standard applications. Everything from Microsoft Office to Visual Studio to lots of other things. Undergraduate students will go in that lab and they'll actually carry out homework assignments from various classes using a number of different standard applications. Those apps need to be understood, documented, configured, and work well. Some of the apps on there, for example, Visual Studio. When it was initially installed, whoever installed it didn't really realize that there's a way to get this app to be network aware. They may not know what that all means, but again, this is a very common problem that you run into in production IT. Being asked to install and configure and document apps or other things that you're going to put on the network, that'd be a very common task in the world of IT. I've got some specific examples, but there's more to the project than just what you see here. Microsoft Office Words. The project is called Microsoft Office Word. Microsoft Office Word needs to have a number of default configurations. When you run Office, any of the Office products, you can configure it to your own liking. For example, in Word, you can say, this is the default font. When you begin a new document, when you start typing, it will use the default font. You can say, here's spacing, here's this, here's that, and the other thing. I want those configurations set such that any user in the lab, when they begin Microsoft Office Word, they get these things. Century Schoolbook, 12 point, 1.0 line spacing, 1-inch margin all around, etc. Again, this is easy to do in an individual environment, harder in a networked environment. It just needs to be investigated and taken care of. Questions on what this is asking? Anything that struck you maybe when you read it? Question, sir. Yes, that's a possibility. May need to install additional apps, e.g. different browsers. And that may also imply the reconfiguration of those things. For example, I'm sure on the Windows side, Firefox is there. Is browsers. Is it set to have the default home page be the CS server? How is it set as far as security issues? Yeah, that might be part of it too. Good question. There's definitely a relationship between some of these. Setting up apps is something that is done on clients with a knowledge of servers. Project 3 asks you to set up client machines. There's probably a relationship among these things. The actual client machines, for example, in S114D, there are 25 iMac, 27-inch Core i5 iMacs there. The configuration needs to be documented and updated. It was originally installed by student workers 3 student worker groups ago, okay? And when they installed it, I said, have you documented things? They said, yes. I said, show me the documentation. They showed me. But as it turned out, when the next group tried to do it, the documentation wasn't helpful, okay? And some of the documentation was just totally incorrect. So the clients need to actually be set up, and the setup needs to be documented. This project will allow you to investigate Windows Active Directory, and that will show up on a couple of the projects. Okay. You'll also need to probably take a look at scripts and batch files and issues of group policy and other kinds of things. In the vast majority of information technology shops in the world today, they are dealing with Windows, and these are very standard things. The Windows Active Directory, Windows Group Policy, these are just things that it's helpful if you understand them. Pick out a specific thing. When the user logs in, what happens? You know what? I couldn't tell you. There's a couple scripts that are run. I'm not sure in what order they're run. But for example, what happens first when a user logs in? Is group policy applied, or are login scripts run first? Okay, that's what you say. Okay. Can you prove that? It needs to be understood and documented. Okay, yeah. You know what? I won't keep stopping and asking if there are questions. There are questions. You're going to jump in this little pause in between. There's a very common tool used in the IT world today to clone machines. The idea of cloning a machine is to make an exact duplicate copy of the hard drive contents. For example, there are 10 computers in the back of this room here. The hardware is either identical or nearly identical. What we'd like to do is to ensure that the software is also identical or nearly identical. Here's what happens. If somebody installed something on one machine, then that machine would be different. One way to make sure that they were all the same would then be go to the other 9 and install that app there. That's time-consuming and also problematic. If one machine was updated with Windows security patches, then we'd have to go through and manually update all of them. That's not the way it's done in the world of IT. Instead, what happens is one machine is reconfigured, and then that machine is cloned. Many products call this making an image of the machine. We have a product, it's called Deploy Studio. The problem is, well, actually we use 2 different kinds of tools for cloning. We use a different tool to clone this lab. Deploy Studio has been relegated to nobody understands how it works anymore. Okay? Somebody is going to have to investigate Deploy Studio, figure out how to clone, create an image of a machine, and then how to push that image back out. The software exists. You just need to investigate how it works and then actually get it to work. Okay, we've talked about the actual clients. We've talked about the software on them. Now we're going to talk about the servers. We currently have, I believe the number is 5, oh no, that's wrong, 6 different servers in the CS domain. In any network domain, servers play different roles. They set up relationships to each other. That relationship needs to be, first of all, understood, and then documented, and then configured correctly. Right now, if you investigated our servers, you'd see that there are a number of errors that are generated every day. Why? Because things are not configured properly. this common task. Okay? Course demonstrations. I wanted to go back here and give you a better example. I just have a couple listed here. There are a number of undergraduate courses where the instructors would like some demonstration programs whereby they could talk about a topic, but rather than just talking about it or reading about it, the student could actually experiment with it. For example, sampling rate. I talk about sampling rate in a couple different classes. The difference and the trade-offs between a higher sampling rate. You know, if you we're talking about digital to analog to digital conversion. If I sample at a higher rate, I'll have higher sound quality. The trade-off is I've got a bigger file. Bigger files, more storage space, longer data transmission times, and so it goes. Well, it'd be really kind of interesting to show the relationship there. In other words, something that showed me, hey, here's a sampling at, you know, a low bit rate, 8,000 samples per second. That is not CD quality, by the way. And here's a sample at a higher rate, like 44,000 times a second. Okay? Playing back the same sound clip that was sampled at 8K and 44K, there'd be a noticeable difference in the sound quality. It'd be cool to have somebody create that or find it or something. Same thing with image resolution. You know, think about compression. Think about JPEG. JPEG is a lossy compression standard. It'd be kind of interesting to show an image, the raw image, zoom in and show all its detail, and then do it on a JPEG at different compression levels and zoom in and see, oh, yeah, not as good. But then there's a trade-off. A JPEG with high compression is going to take a little bit of storage versus a raw image. Out in the alcove there, yeah, lobby, whatever it is, there's an HP TouchSmart running Windows 8. It'd be really nice to have some good apps on that. I mean, it's a touch screen. It'd be nice to have some apps that you can actually touch on it and do some things on it, sort of as a demonstration for the department. Okay? All right. I've suddenly decided that just saying the same thing that I'm reading here is probably not that useful. Let me just focus on this number 11. These are all good projects. Number 11, though, could actually be a number of different projects because we have a number of different courses. Think back to any of the courses that you've taken in our MSIT program. Having some good labs that could be online would be very beneficial, not just for on-campus students, but also for distance learning students. The goal of this would be to work with an instructor and to come up with some online labs that you would produce. And by produce, I don't mean you have to create them from scratch. These are things that you can find. If you want to create something from scratch, you can. For example, work with the instructor in applied artificial intelligence and create an online robotics lab. If you took 515 with me on campus, we dealt with Lego Mindstorms. We played with little robots. Harder to do that at a distance. Could you think of and could you find something that could substitute for that? Does somebody have a website somewhere that allows you to virtually program a robot and watch it happen? The answer to that is yes. You need to find it, document it, create a good one, whatever it might be. Okay? Other ones. These last couple ones, okay. For example, this one here, PHP install config. There's more to that. This is actually would be working with the assistant director, Professor Hoppy. He is currently in charge of migrating our current MSIT website from its old static self to a new active self based upon PHP. So you could investigate some issues with PHP, and under his direction, you know, working with Professor Happy, help create version 2 of the MSIT website. And so it goes. Okay? We have several webcams in the department. There's lots of interesting software that can either be obtained or created that would do a number of different things, like just count the number of people coming in and out of the area, determining how many people are in a lab at various hours throughout the day. When is the lab most heavily utilized? And so it goes. Okay. Now, yep, that's old stuff. Good. Question? Yes. 14, sure. Okay, you bet.
What kind of inventory you are asking?
Okay, like any IT organization, we have a lot of assets and resources that we need to keep track of. Those resources include hardware, software, and other stuff. For example, just as an example, in the department there are there's 100 client computers. Okay. The other day, I needed to determine the serial number of certain iMac models. Next door, we have 2 different models of iMacs. That means anything to you. We have 11/3 and a 12/2 iMac models. I needed to know all the serial numbers of the 11/3s. You know how I did that? I walked over there, and I fired up each one in the Mac OS, and I selected about this Mac, and I clicked through until I got the serial number. I don't want to do that, okay? What I want is I want to have, I'm going to say database, okay, but again, it wouldn't have to be a database, okay? I want the information about those stored in an online, I'll say database, doesn't have to be a database. Okay? I want to be able to sit at a machine, and when somebody asks me, how many of your computers were manufactured before 2010? I can query that, and I can figure it out. If somebody asks me, how many licenses of Office do you have? I can figure that out. Okay. Now, this project would include, this is very much a front-end stuff because nothing exists. So much of this project would be developing the schema. And to do that, you'd have to work with somebody in the department that could tell you, this is what we need to capture. This is the kind of information that we need to have available. And that would be presented to you. There's also the possibility, and maybe it's a second person or potential group that would actually enter this data. So this could be an additional project to enter the data. The difficulty with that at this present time is if the people didn't have the database up and running well before the end of the time, it'd be really hard to put that data in there unless you were smart about it. Unless you captured the data in a very generic sense. Maybe you tag it with XML, or at the very least you'd create a comma delimited file. Okay, this could be done, right? Create XML to tag it, or comma delete it at the very least. That way, as soon as the schema was done before it was actually implemented, somebody else could be capturing all the data in such a manner that it could be imported into the database easily. Okay. Good. Any questions you have about any of these other projects, perhaps?
Can we talk about
Mm-hmm.
I see question number 15 as
Yes.
So what kind of promotional materials are you talking
Okay.
about? Focuses on the whole
Brochures, video.
program
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so that a beginner comes into the program, he knows what exactly happens.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. No, no, more before somebody comes into it. Now, I need to tell you that one of the reasons I didn't flesh this out is because I may, well, maybe we can work together. I actually have an undergraduate student who is, I believe, going to take this on. You might have to work with my undergrad student who has kind of a lead role because he is a graphic designer as well as an information technologist. Okay, but yeah, it would include you creating. I want to promote it using technology, so you know, brochures as long as they're just not paper, video, program descriptions, whatever we want to say here. Still an option, but I got to check and see what we're really doing there. But it could be an option working with the other person. Okay.
how old are the machines we are talking about?
Many of the PCs date from the 70s and 80s, and some from the 90s. They do all work. It's not like you'd have to take out the soldering iron and fix them, etc. But one of the things that, unfortunately, here's what happened. We used to have all these machines up at the room when you first walk in here, S118A, used to be part of our department. I had all the museum, or many of the museum pieces set up and actually running in there. But then I lost that room. Now, that's been some time ago. It's been 5 years ago or something. And I've been really anxious to get these machines set up again. I'm pretty close to having more space available. So now what needs to happen is some machines need to be reconditioned, if you will. You know, I need to make sure, can they fire up? And then we need to locate where's the software, what else do I need for the hardware, and then somehow there needs to be some type of demonstration program available for it, and probably a procedure put up, and then like a little display thing. If you walk and look just outside my office there are 6 or so machines that we set up some time ago with just placards and other things talking about them. At the time, all those machines worked, and there was a demo program for them. And I'd like to get at some of our other machines, too. So, sorry, there's a long answer. How old are the machines? Realize the first true personal computer was 1977, okay? And I do have examples of the first 3, Commodore PET, Apple, and Radio Shack TRS-80. I have 1970s versions of those. It's been a while since I fired them up. They may not work. Machines from the 80s, though, and 90s are probably what we'd focus on. By the way, if you want to know what we have, if you look on the website, Department Information, Chicard Museum. This will show you many, although not all, this will show you many of the machines that we have there. Okay. So, I mean, Commodore PET, this is not the original PET. I don't remember if this is 70s or early 80s. And some of these machines I know are in very good, the Hewlett-Packard HP 150. This is a machine circa early 1980s. It was, as far as I can determine, the first commercially available machine with a touchscreen. It was easily 20 years ahead of its time. Okay, didn't do well because people weren't used to touchscreen ideas. TRS mod, oh yeah, okay, and all these kinds of things. So, as far as I know, all these things work. We can verify that. Trying to run the large systems like the PDP-11 or 8 would be problematic. They require 220 volt power which I don't have easily available. So we'll focus on the smaller ones. Whoa. Questions about any of the other?
Can we talk about the project 9? I mean, number 9.
Sure.
Roaming profile.
Okay. Yeah. This sort of is related to maybe this one here, 3, and certainly some other ones too. In 9, what I want to do is let's assume that what we have currently set up actually works and works well. Now we want to enhance it. Right now, for example, if you went and logged in on a machine next door there, you would only, I think, I guess I can't even verify this, you'd only be served a local profile. A roaming profile would be much better. A roaming profile would allow you to make changes to your computer desktop and configuration. And then as you roam, as you go to another machine, those changes would follow you. At one time in the very distant past, we had roaming profiles. Somehow it went away. Not sure why. That's part of it. There's some other things. The other aspect of this is to get some consistency. We want start menus and policies set up and have some consistency. I know that's also listed under another one, but unfortunately, in any modern environment, there's lots of different places where we have to get consistency.
Would I have to create roaming profiles? I mean, like set that up again?
That'd be one aspect of it, yes.
On a network.
Yes. Yeah. It brings up a good question. Let me jump in and answer, and that is, really the reason for doing requirements is so we know exactly what's expected when you're all done. Okay, good. Oh, consistent. I don't want to say consistent. I forgot. I lost my train of thought. Implement stuff. They're good enough. Okay, good. Other questions about any of these on the list or anything you were wondering about?
Project number 10.
Yes.
Can we use like available softwares and integrate them to create some?
Yes? If I understand the question is, can I use something that's already available? Yes. It has to work within our environment. It has to work seamlessly. It has to be integrated in our environment. And it has to do something interesting. Yes. Now, 10 is something where you could create an app if you wanted to. You could also find some things. Both of those are valid solutions. But part of this that's not there is really working with the client and figuring out exactly what needs to happen. There's a little bit of the specs here. It needs to be interactive. I want this to draw in a potential user, you know, touch some things, click some things, do some back and forth type of stuff. I just don't want it to be like a screensaver where it throws up a pretty picture and you watch it. There needs to be some kind of interactivity there. Other questions?
Do we have any assignment for next week?
Yes, you do. Let's look at that. The question is, do we have an assignment for next week? Yes, you do. I've listed, I think, everything here. The problem is that's a lot, and I know it's scary. I probably should just had them come in one at a time, but anyway. Today is Monday, February 4th. I think I talked about these last time, but I want to officially assign it now. So in 0, which you submitted, you were thinking kind of generally some number, 3 to 5 different projects, what the type of project interested you. And again, I'm not going to hold you to any of that. The real purpose of that was just to make sure you were thinking about it there. Assignment 1, now that we've talked more about requirements, you've had an opportunity to think more about each of these, and I can still answer questions. I want you to pick 1 or 2 projects that you would like to do. And for each, I want you to create a project proposal. You don't have to do 2, okay? But I want you to go through this process with 2. So, this is all based upon your current understanding of the project. It may change. It will change. Nobody knows completely any of these projects. That's going to change. But I want you to describe and overview the project as you understand it at the moment. It should be at least a paragraph, not just 1 sentence. Okay. And from that, notice that this is a descriptive. The second thing is the problem as you think it is right now. And then, as you think about it more, what are some questions that you would like to ask? Some things that you don't understand right now? Okay. And then there's some other fluffy stuff there.
So
yes?
it would be like an interviewer and an interview session?
Yeah, with the exception of you actually don't get the benefit of the other person because you're just going to create this. In other words, as you're creating it, no doubt a question will come up and you'll wonder, what about that? We'll write that down. You will get the opportunity to ask it. You bet.
Client and developer. I'm just reconfirming this is what I understand the problem is.
Well, sort of. This is not that problem definition document that we talked about. This is a little easier than that. But yeah, we can absolutely phrase it as this is how you understand the problem. I'm forcing you to do this, writing it down away from the client, just so you can think about those kinds of issues. Yeah.
1 or 2 projects, right?
Correct. If you can't decide and you want to do 5 different ones, you can prepare 5. But I think most people would rather just prepare 1 or 2 of these. Okay. I'm giving you this today. It's due before day 3. Next time we meet, you're going to bring this and talk about it with Professor Hoppe.
So what about the projects outside the list?
It's a possibility. However, couple requirements. Number 1, it has to be for a nonprofit organization. Number 2, you can't be related or friends of the client. It has to be somebody, separate from you. And we really want to look at the project because I don't want folks to get overwhelmed with some of the outside projects. The advantage to the inside ones that I presented you is some of them are mine, but the ones that aren't, I've put limits on it such that outside projects can grow. They really can. But it's okay, yes. Nonprofit means you can't create an app for McDonald's or something like that, or a restaurant or a gas station or a grocery store or a manufacturer. Nonprofit organizations are like private schools like us. Yes, religious organizations, community groups, service organizations. Yes, that's okay. You want to make a proposal for that, and we need to review that too.
What in assignment 1, can we submit the proposal outside the list?
Yes, right. What I want you to do in assignment 1, they don't have to be just the projects that I told you. Select 1 or 2 projects you'd like to complete. I'm sorry, maybe I should make that clear. It can be a project of your own choosing, but again, we're going to work with that a little bit too and just make sure. Nothing is approved right now. Okay, we still have to go through an approval process. Okay. Hey, come on. Oh, sorry. So that's one thing. The next thing, so that's due next Sunday, and then bring it with you Monday as you discuss with Professor Hoppe. The other thing I'm assigning you today that you can't actually complete until you know what the project is is I want you to do this first milestone in requirements, but we've talked about it, so I want you to you can go ahead and think about this. This is the problem definition document for whatever project you do. So once we have the official sign-off, and again, the goal is next Monday, on-campus students, when you meet with Professor Hoppe, by the time you're done with that meeting, then we're going to have a project either approved or really close to it. Okay. As I mentioned, because projects are different and different types, some of these questions may not apply. Some projects you'll focus a lot on one versus the other, and so it goes. But this gives you some idea of what you're creating. There are two other milestones in the requirements phase, the requirements document, the systems requirement document, and the prototype. And I'll assign those next time, and you'll have a little bit to work on that.
You have to just go through this.
Pardon me?
Assignment 1. Assignment 3, we have to just go through this.
Correct. You can't go through this until you know what your project is, though. So you can think about this and sketch some things out before next Monday, but I'm going to recommend that you don't actually create your final until you know what your project is, and then you can focus on the problem. To do this document, you're going to have to interact with the client. You're going to have to ask questions. All right. So those you see 1 and 0, 1, 3. You're asking what is 2? 2 I'll give you. 2 is, oh, yeah. We talked about this, right? Is 2 did 2 show up in January? Nope. Okay. Well, keep track of it. Because what's going to happen is it's going to show up as being due sometime in March. Okay. So don't forget to keep, sorry, I should have that set up front. Don't forget to keep track of the time that you spend on this project. You upload it once in the middle, once at the end of the course. Okay. Now, if you want to look ahead, you can absolutely look ahead to the other things that need to be done here, but don't panic. Here's next phases, then we'll talk about specifications, and then we'll go through the process. Okay? All right. Questions then about either what you have to do for next time or projects or ma'am.
I have a question about the communication. What kind of communication do you want? For a user or system or technical?
I guess it depends upon the project. Are you thinking about a specific project? No? Okay. Oh, are you talking about the document? Okay, the documentation we're doing here. Okay. This documentation is process documentation. So the answer is it applies to different stakeholders depending upon the document. For example, the requirements document is really designed for the client predominantly and maybe for the user secondarily. But it's really going to be the client that comes and says, this is our problem, so you have to come up with the solution. Sometimes the client and the user are the same, but they are different. Did that answer the question?
I mean, because the language will be different.
Yes?
Yeah, for the user will be similar.
Yes.
For the technical will be
Yes.
maybe.
Yes, that's correct. Again, it'll be different for the documentation. For example, the specifications document is going to have to use straightforward terminology for the user, because the user is going to read the specs and say, yep, if I use something like that, it would solve the problem. Design document, on the other hand, is not written for users. A design document is written for an implementer, for an IT professional. So you're right, the audience changes really depending upon the documentation. For this one, for the initial one that I've assigned, the problem definition, and remember it's not due for 2 weeks, think about you're writing that really for the user / client. This is we want to make sure we understand the client and user's problem. Okay. Sure. Good question.
I have a similar question.
Mm-hmm.
The documentation, am I focusing on like, on a networking project, if I'm setting up a roaming profile, am I documenting keeping in mind that next person who will take over the project to modify or make it more, take it further, am I keeping him in mind, the future person, or am I just telling the client this is what I did and this is how it works?
Answer is both. I'm sorry. The question is, if I was doing a specific project like making a change to the network, adding roaming profiles, when I create documentation, am I just creating declarative documentation saying I did this, or am I creating procedural documentation, this is how to do it? And the answer is both. In a project like that, some of the document is going to be aimed, it's going to be very procedural for the next person that comes along. So like in the project, when I say, document this stuff, I really mean for the next IT professional that's going to come along. But at the same time, there may be some things that the user needs to know that they don't care how roaming profiles will set up, but the user might know, can I turn off roaming? Can I, as the user, turn off roaming profiles? Okay. Well, yeah. And what we'll see is for those kinds of projects, in the implementation phase, you're going to have documents for the person to follow you, the next system administrator, and documents for the user. So yeah, the answer is both. And you're right. If you're thinking that there are different audiences, yep, and we have to create different documentation for those different audiences. Spend some time thinking about projects. We want to get going sooner rather than later. Now, as I mentioned the first day, let's say, this is the beginning of week 2. Let's say 2 weeks from now, the beginning of week 4, you say, I don't want to do that. I think we're still okay. Now, at the beginning of week 8, you say, I don't want to do that. I think we might be in trouble. You need, in addition to just having the actual time, you always need some space in between those blocks. I told you this project is likely, a 100-hour-plus project. Well, there are 168 hours in a week. If you only slept 4 hours a night, you can get this project done, right? No. You can't just do things back to back to back to back. So having a little bit of downtime and let things settle in your brain so you can come back to it fresh is important. There's going to be probably more of that early on, and there'll be much less of that concentrated development as we move into it. So I know it's a little disconcerting up front because you're saying, what if I choose the wrong project? In the real world of information technology, you very seldom get the choice to choose. You very seldom get the opportunity to choose your own project. See, human nature says, look, I want to do a project that I understand, is straightforward, and I can be done quickly with it. And the difficulty we all have right now is we don't know enough about any of these projects that you can say, see, this is what we'd all like to do, right? 12, that's the easy one. I'm picking that one. And what happened? I just made up. I don't know what 12 is. Okay, I just made that. Don't everybody pick that one now. Okay, I just made 29. That's the easy one. There is no 29. Okay, so I'm going to do that one. And then it turns out, oh, it wasn't as easy as I thought. Yeah, I know. Don't panic. There's all going to be elements of that in it. My recommendation is still pick something where the topic interests you. Trust me, even if you look at 2 and you say, I'm not as interested in this one, but I bet it's easier. Now this interests me, but man, it seems hard. You know what? You're going to learn more. You're going to get more out of picking the one that interests you rather than just, and it may turn out that the one you thought was simple wasn't that simple anyway. It's the nature of the beast up front. We don't know. We haven't done these things. Yeah, sorry. Okay, we've done quite a bit. I need to do a little bit more. I'm going to do it off the recording because it has absolutely nothing to do with those of you at a distance. So those of you at a distance,